We're live on YouTube. This is the October 3rd, 2018 meeting of the Node.js modules team. We have an exciting agenda today, starting with an update on progress, starting with issue number 177 that we'll be having a session at the Node.js Collaborator Summit in Vancouver. This will be an opportunity for those from the group who are there in person to meet. We will set up the Zoom and set it up so that people will be able to dial in and participate. Does anyone have any questions about this? I will take the silence that we can move forward on to the next update. The next update that we have is on terminology. References issue number 158 and 184 on Node.js/modules. Saleh, can you give us a quick update on what's going on with the discussion for terminology?
Yeah, so basically I caught up with like the PR that we had open. I'm sorry, I'm just looking for that thread right now. And yeah, sorry, give me one sec. So basically, until now, we were really just defining normative terms. And I thought because we are, dealing with very, very specific operations about modules, then we might want to go a little bit more, like a little bit deeper in our definitions. So stipulative terms, which are really a more specialized way to define something, is something that came to mind. And basically what I tried to do with that is try to define, sorry, one sec. Yeah, so the one example I did was browser interop. And if you go to the PR, I did actually post there like some changes, and I was hoping to get some feedback, but maybe not yet. So like browser interop is basically a stipulative term in the sense that we are going to define some criteria about what we would mean with browser interop. So it's not a generic definition. It's really specific to what we all agree on. The nice thing about this kind of definition is that it forces us to agree on meaning a lot more, in a lot more concrete terms than simple normative terminology. So I guess if people can take a look at the proposed format and maybe come up with some more definitions that could be done this way, I think that would be a good next step for this effort.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Quick note to sneak in before we move to our official agenda items. I'm looking at the list of people on the call. There's 9 of them. All the people who are on the call right now are people who have been fairly active in attending the calls. So I'd like to encourage, 10 of you. Thanks for the heads up, Wes. I'd like to encourage any of you who are on the call who are not currently active members. I think it would be a good idea for you to throw your hat in to move to an active member status, especially if you're able to continue the engagement on the call and to help us reach quorum to make decisions. So just kind of throwing that out there. I don't want to call anyone out individually, but if you find yourself fitting into that space, please consider it. So we're into discussions. I'm going to set a 15-minute time box on the first discussion, which is surveys, which can be led by Saleh. There's 3 issues that are open right now: developer survey, survey initial drafts, and survey purpose and scope. We have a deadline coming up next week of Node Interactive. A lot of us will be there in person during the week, so we could actually have time from Tuesday to Thursday to work on this in person, to have something that we could potentially deliver at the Collaborator Summit. I'm going to hand it off to Saleh to lead the conversation on it. Can you tell us a little bit about where the work's at right now, where you could use support, and what we can do to help you?
Yeah, so I guess we tried different ways to get a survey ready that could go live and like be just online for anyone to take before the summit. And that there were a lot of like challenges, and I didn't find a good way to get everybody's input, especially with questions being very sensitive to certain people. I guess everybody's been focusing on other things at this point. So I guess a backup plan for the summit, and it seemed more reasonable, was to actually draft a very small survey or a very easy easy to draft survey. Let's put it this way. So not a lot of effort goes into making the questions perfect. But the idea is that at the summit, the survey will be given to 3 or 4 people with sort of a moderator who can help explain what is meant by the questions and collect feedback on how to better ask a question. I kind of posted all the drafts and links to all those drafts in the different issues. I was hoping other people would also get a chance to draft their own few questions or maybe their own version of the survey. So at this point, the issues really outline where help can be, more like where participation can take place. Worst case scenario, we're going to have at least one form that we will give to groups of 3 or 4. And at that point, anyone attending can help moderate groups during the summit.
Okay, excellent. Any questions, concerns, thoughts that people have right now?
Oh no, keybind doesn't work. Oh yes, it does.
So is the idea that we want to work on the survey at the summit and then actually use the survey on not use it, but like actually ask certain attendees at the conference what their takes on it are, what we could do better? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, like it's like a very unique group that is going to be there, and we will have the benefit of asking how to better frame this. Mm-hmm. It's not a simple thing to ask a question and really appreciate how the person taking the survey will actually think is meant when you're asking it. So we are like, I'm struggling to get input on what the best questions that everybody else wants in the survey would be. And the second step would be to actually frame them in such a way that you would get the answer that you're looking for. So the summit will definitely help point out really bad questions that get very bad data. But also give us feedback on how to better ask it after we clarify to those participating what was really meant here. So it's a back and forth that is, definitely going to help steer us in the direction of better questions.
Excellent, thank you. We are so close to quorum here. I'm actually in the process of pinging people on Twitter to see if we can get 2 more people to show up. I think that we can move forward from the conversation on surveys right now, unless there's anything else to add. Saleh, is there anything else right now, or are you happy moving forward?
No, we can move forward. If there are any questions, we can always come back in the end if we have time.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
So then that kind of leaves us the remainder of the time to talk about the minimal kernel. So I don't know how closely everyone has been paying attention to it, but we have 2 open bits to take a peek at for this. We have issue 180, which is open and was quite active this morning, of identifying and documenting the first phase of the kernel. And we have pull request 6 on ECMAScript modules, which implements it in a way that passes all the testing suites and is kind of ready to land. So I'm gonna kind of leave it to the floor. Do people have thoughts about where we're at? I guess the first one that's really easy to ask everyone, we've got 11 people on this call right now. Does anyone have any objections to what's currently going on with it? Or does anyone have any objections to moving forward with it right now?
Just to clarify, is this in discussion for the PR for the docs or the PR for the ECMAScript minimal core?
Yes, both.
Okay. No objections to either.
And when you say moving forward, do you mean just like moving forward, meaning merging in the requests and nothing more than that?
Well, I mean, yeah, let's start with just talking about like actually merging these. If we get 2 more people on this call that are active members before the end of the call, we can actually get approval and land both of these pull requests. And then I think we should spend some time talking about what people's visions are of phase 2 and their thoughts about the process so far and kind of what's missing from phase 1.
I guess while you're waiting on trying to get 2 more people, just to clarify, I don't have any objections with merging either of these. I wonder if maybe some people who haven't attended in many meetings might want to consider going down to like observer or something, so we don't have much trouble hitting quorum. But maybe that's something else to talk about later.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely. I've been like kind of quietly reaching out to people one-to-one. For the people who have not been, like actively engaging, it's kind of tough, right? Because like on one hand, you want to be fair to everyone, but on the other hand, if like people are just not responding even to those requests, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do. So it is possible if we want, and perhaps this is something that we should consider drafting, is some more guidance or governance around attendance and participation. And, ironically, we'll need to have quorum to land that. But assuming that we're able to get quorum for it, we should be able to. And it looks like we have a pull request open to make Kevin Smith an active member, or an issue open. So in theory, if we can get those 2 extra people between now and then, but in the next 42 minutes, we can maybe land all these things at once, and I'll be really excited. So one thing I wanted to point out, and I think, Gus, you're on the call, right? Great. So Gus, you're someone who I wanted to talk to about this. So in the minimal kernel, as I was putting it together, I had to go through and change all the tests. So all the tests that were originally importing CommonJS are now using create require from path. And I don't know if you've gone and seen the examples right now, but I find working with it currently not extremely ergonomic because to actually get a require function that we can use, import meta require is going to give us a string file, like a file URL that's a string. It's not a URL object. And if we just pass that to create require from path, it's not going to work because our path objects do not recognize file URLs. We then have to bring in another API, which is like URL string to path, which is another API that just like got exposed recently. I think it was, God, I'm totally spacing on whose PR that it was Guy Bedford. Thank you, Guy. But it seems really not ergonomic for a long-term solution to be working with having to import 2 different APIs, knowing how to use them, knowing that they exist. I know that that's not like the solution from a user experience standpoint that we're going to want to ship. So Gus, the question that I wanted to pose to you, if you're up for talking about it, is I know that because the FS stuff got blocked and didn't end up landing. Wes just pasted it in the chat. Thank you very much. None of these things have actually landed on 10 yet, none of these APIs. So I'm curious, Gus, of seeing like how this API needs to be used to use it with import meta URL. Does that change any of your opinions about about separating the from path from the from URL. Should we implement from URL? Or alternatively, and another thing I was thinking about it, should we look into adding file URL string support to the path objects? Because that would, I know that under the hood, create require from path is using path.dirname. So if path.dirname started to support file URLs, then it would just transparently start working with import meta URL. I guess to Gus in particular, but also to the floor, has anyone had any thoughts on these particular APIs and kind of what a more ergonomic API would look like moving forward?
I mean, like, composing create require and from path is, I guess, kind of a pain. And I'll be honest, if it was shipped, someone would immediately make a package that exports one function that does create require from path, and you pass an import meta URL object. So building it into core would make sense in some regard. The exact implementation,
I think Gus was muted. Let's see. Oh yeah, Gus is. Oh, there, Gus.
Test.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay. Sorry for the loud environment. So the ergonomics of, like, I've never personally considered this pattern to be something we should ship just because, like, I mean, the issue that's coming up now. Like, personally, my money right now is on the thing that Guy is working on, which is dynamic modules, and then we'll never need to worry about this ever again. I would say
on that?
Well, basically, like, dynamic modules will allow us to fix this problem where, like, there's this, like, awkward jagged edge between CJS and MJS, and then we can just not have to separate them. We can just use the import syntax for everything, and it will work.
But I mean, for what that's worth, Gus, like, I think that covers some of the scenarios, but I think there are scenarios where people are going to want to dynamically import CJS modules and not necessarily get a promise. They would want a synchronous require API.
Definitely. And I would say that probably wouldn't be the common case. Like, I imagine there are definitely cases where what needs to happen. I think, right, like, I can't even remember anymore if the create require function is exposed as, like, from path and from URL. I'd have to check that. But if it is not, that could be a solution we take. And if it is, I think that's probably, like, from my perspective, I think it's fine if that is the case. I'm just, like, reading through this to see. Okay, so yeah, it's just exposed as create require. So, like, the ergonomics about it, we could do create require from URL, and then just, like, use that. But, like, again, personally, I don't see this as, like, the solution, or at least the default solution, right? Like, it's for someone who needs to do, like, something that's not the default, I guess. So the, like, idea that someone would be using this in every file of their system, you know, gluing everything together, never really was my intention when designing it.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, and maybe I could be wrong on this, but I have a distinct feeling that we're not going to be seeing extremely fast iterations on this, right? Like, it's going to take some time to get that stuff standardized at TC39 for dynamic modules at the very least. And so I do think that we need some sort of process. Okay, so hold on 1 second quickly before we go too much further. Guy Bedford just showed up. We do have quorum now. So while we have quorum in the room, I think that we should move forward on a couple things. Does anyone object to just moving forward with that? Okay, cool. We have quorum. Excellent. Congratulations, everyone. We have a couple open pull requests and open issues that we would like to resolve. The first one is an issue for Kevin Smith to move to become an active member. Do we have any objections to moving forward with that? Excellent. Congratulations. Passed unanimously.
I humbly accept.
I will update that in the GitHub UI and everything. So now we've got 13 members here. Excellent. Does anyone object to landing PR 180 documenting phase 1 of the minimal kernel? Excellent. That moves forward. And the next one, ECMAScript modules number 6. Does anyone object to landing the minimal kernel in our fork? Excellent. Thank you, everyone. We did it. Amazing. I'm so excited right now. I'm beaming. I'm actually giving a talk about modules in 2 hours, and now I have to make some new slides. So I'll just update. We had Guy join right at the end. Guy, we were on. Hey, Matteo, thanks for joining. Matteo, to update you, we just reached consensus to land all the things. So it's great. Guy, we were just talking about the ergonomics of create require from string. Matteo, I'm sure this is something that you would be interested in as well. I've just pasted the current boilerplate that we need to get a require function inside of ESM in the minimal kernel right now. Extra context create require from path has not landed in a node release yet. Neither has the URL string to path. So if you take a look at this, this is a lot of hoops to jump through, and it's a kind of thing that I think most people would want to do. So the question was kind of like, are these APIs that we actually should be looking at landing on 10, or should we be kind of doing an emergency PR to change the API before it goes out in a release?
So my impression on this one was that we were going to have two functions, create require from path and create require from URL, where the create require from URL would be the one that would create the ergonomics for this situation, as far as I recall. We could, so the suggestion was, instead of implementing create require from URL into core, that could go into the minimal kernel, so that it doesn't, as you say, we don't end up with experimental work going out in stable node. So I'm completely for implementing a create require from URL in the minimal kernel.
Okay.
If that helps, or if everyone agrees.
I think create require from path is still very useful though.
But do you think just a create require that could take paths or URLs, like why would we not want that?
That was part of a long discussion on the GitHub issue, which I gave up.
Jeffrey's got his hand up.
So I'm not opposed to any of these things. I just kind of wanted to raise a question of like, I thought that people were still like intending generally for like the new modules implementation to have an import statement be able to import either ESM or CommonJS in some form. Now, whether we, in other words, to try to get to the author-driven disambiguity that seems to be that we have, I mean, that would be something else. While we have quorum, do we have consensus on that we want author-driven disambiguation? But anyway, so my question is, assuming we do want that, and assuming that that's probably going to be through an import statement, then what is the use case for these create require functions? Like, they seem cool. I don't mind that they exist. They just give you another way to import CommonJS into an ESM environment. But, you know, like, I just don't understand where they fit in. I guess that's my question.
Gus had his hand up. Gus, did you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So the original reason that I made this create require function PR was not actually even for interop. It was for tooling, and the interop thing kind of fell out of that. People were like, "Oh, we could use this," and I think it's a good tool for that. But it was like, the reason that it exists is not specifically for this purpose. It's just one of the use cases of it.
So in other words, it's used even within an all CommonJS environment as well, you mean?
That is correct.
And I believe we were utilizing it in core as well.
Yeah, internally, this method has existed for like since the beginning of CommonJS. It's just basically exposing it.
Rob, you've got your hand up. Rob, if you're talking, you are currently muted.
To respond to Jeffrey's question, there are really good use cases for synchronous require loading CommonJS. One thing is speeding up app start time. A bunch of projects use synchronous require to achieve lazy inline loading. So this API has a definite use case.
Okay, excellent. So maybe one of the things that we can break off, and this has me, it was actually one of those things where I started hacking on the kernel and I immediately kind of got excited when working with this like kind of obtuse API. It's like, oh my God, it's a really clear first thing for us to work on next. Has anyone else had a chance to like kind of look through or play with the kernel or go through anything? Is there anything that feels really unergonomic? Are there specific things that you want to bring forward as part of phase 2? And how should we do phase 2? Should we be doing it piecemeal, or should we be trying to put together a document that we reach consensus on like we did with phase 1?
I mean, phase 2 is when we start implementing things that are like potentially do like block features off from the future, right?
Potentially, phase 2 could also just be an iteration where we make things more ergonomic. I think it really depends on how we want to scope it. Rob, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. So to answer your question of should we do this, doc or just implementation, it seems clear to me that the things that need to be resolved are not really coding issues, and therefore we definitely need a doc to define these things first. It's the most accessible way of getting everyone's input.
You broke up on my end. Can you repeat that one more time, please?
So I said I definitely think that we need to specify phase 2 as a document because that's the way to resolve the human decision making. It's not a coding issue, so a document is the most accessible way of getting everyone's input.
That makes sense. Perhaps what we could do is start by kicking off an issue where we can collect thoughts and then turn those thoughts into a document and then work on landing that document. Does anyone have objections to that? Jeffrey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I don't have objection to that. I was just going to paste in, there was that one pull request that I had started about the MIME type map thing. That's already pretty much documented out. So unless there's any more feedback people wanted to give to it or discussion that anyone feels like it needs, that could be something that maybe either moves into the document or turns into a PR. I think the technical thing to work out is just how it will interact with loaders, because I don't know if it does at all, or if the loaders thing just needs to be designed in order to build this part of it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess like some thoughts that I have on that. Do you think that exposing the API that explicitly has people like writing inline MIME types is the most ergonomic way to approach this?
I mean, that was the point of that PR and the issue that preceded it. There were like 6 or 8 options that people went through and gave feedback on and voted toward. So, I mean, you can look through those to see if any of those other options seem better to you. I mean, if anyone wants to propose anything else, but I mean, there were several people that went through that and tried to reach a consensus on the design for this.
Mm-hmm. I have a feeling like this is going to be tied really heavily into loaders, but that's just kind of my intuition. Guy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say in terms of process, I think like since we're starting with the minimal kernel and then are going to add in effectively features, I guess, instead of trying to like, I don't know how much scope we want to put behind phase 2, but trying to go for those small wins seems like a good way to do it. Like, for example, if we've agreed on something like create require from URL, we can have individual proposals and sort of go for that sort of individual proposals model might work quite well to keep discussions focused as well.
Another individual proposal that I think we could or should explore, kind of depending on how we want to do it, would be we stripped out not only the full node resolution algorithm, but also package main. So perhaps that's another one that we can start kind of bike shedding on, is like, do we want to support kind of a named main, whether or not it is named main, in modules that are in the node modules folder? Do we want it to be main? Do we want it to be module? That seems like another one that's kind of ripe for a bit of bike shedding, but is not too, like, I think that's a thing that we'll need no matter what. I could be mistaken on that. I'm open to being told differently. Rob commented in here about loaders in phase 2. I know for a fact that there's at least 3 different people that are exploring loaders in depth right now. And I think it would be a good idea, perhaps maybe in the next meeting, even if we can, to get each of those people to give us a presentation about how they view loaders and what their proposal is for implementing and running loaders on top of the new kernel. Any specific thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I mean, especially if they're going to be a dependency for what I was talking about, then maybe it makes sense to do loaders sooner than later or next.
Yeah, I can imagine something where, like, we have a small phase 2 that's a couple of piecemeal bits that improve user experience from the kernel, and then a phase 3 that's the loaders. That seems pretty ripe to me, because I think once we figure out our loader story, we can then make the decision on all the other hard decisions that we can't really reach consensus on based on how the loaders themselves work. But I'm sure that we can reach consensus on a couple of UX things that don't really, affect future proposals. I think a couple fast, small wins would feel really great. Saleh, you have your hand up?
I think now that we have everything stripped out, one problem I was struggling with the experimental modules was there were some optimizations that were baked into the module wrap itself. But then if I'm using a custom loader, then I'm implementing everything, JavaScript side at this point. That creates it's hard for us to design a good module system if our module loading is done, in module wrap, and then we expect user loaders to be JavaScript. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we should have really, we should see how efficient it will be to do it in JavaScript. Because if it's not going to be efficient enough, then no matter how good an API for a loader is going to be offered, maybe it's not going to be that useful if it's not going to be possible without module wrap optimizations. Because once you can't use those optimizations, then your loader is really going to be at a disadvantage from the get-go.
So what would you imagine to be the... Oh, Jordan's got his hand up. Jordan, what were you going to say?
Yeah, it might have been the same question. Just what do you mean by good enough? Because like Babel node and TS node and all those other things are currently considered good enough by a number of people, even though they're very, very slow. So I guess my instinct is that bar is very low. It's very easy to clear the performance requirement. But like, what's your criteria for good enough? question.
So I guess it's just pointing out the fact that like I do realize that using tooling today, you can get the same you can get really good performance aspects, but then people working on module wrap have certain expectations for performance, and I think to them they would be better qualified to say what is good enough. But if module wrap needed to resolve packages and do all that work outside of JavaScript, then was that due to the fact that it wouldn't be good enough in JavaScript side, or was it just part of the experimental aspect? See, like I really don't have the answers, but it just these were questions that I kept asking, when I looked at the code. So.
So if I understand correctly, when we start looking at loaders, you'd like to think about what should be in C++ versus what should be in JS. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Or at least make sure that making a loader in JavaScript will be as efficient as if we end up relying on module wrap for resolving things. Then we should find a way to make sure that loaders written in JavaScript can be as efficient. At least just consider it. Whatever solution will end up coming from this is very premature at the moment, but just keeping in mind that if someone is doing a JavaScript, purely JavaScript loader, then how can we provide them the optimizations? Whoa, sorry about that. How can we make sure that they can benefit from the optimizations, not be locked into either module wrap resolution or not?
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. Like, I know for a fact that, at least two of the people that I've talked to that are working on exploring different loader implementations, performance is a very high-level concern, and allowing people to write loaders that are efficient is definitely, something that they want to do. With that being said, like, I am concerned that it might be a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, in that, like, I think we need to come up with implementations and, like, explicit designs for loaders before we can really do an analysis and figure out whether or not they're efficient. But I think that every single person who's working on a loader implementation does want to allow for loaders written purely in JavaScript to be fairly efficient and to have process built in to allow those loaders. They probably won't be able to measure head-to-head against native built-in loaders, but at least to make them reasonably competitive.
Yeah, I guess that's really the, like, just verbalizing it, I guess, and agreeing that it's a mutual concern is all I was looking for at this point. Thanks.
Every piece of code that goes into Node, and, like, I think the people who have been committing for a while can chime into +1 on this, but I don't think there's ever anything that lands into Node core where performance is not a key concern. So I think, that will definitely be something that will be at the top of the design as we figure it out. But, like, the first iterations may be, really bloody slow.
All right, thanks.
Rob, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think when I've heard people talk about loaders so far, they've talked about using them to experiment with different types of resolution, different types of transformation. So I think them being slow, at least at this stage, is absolutely fine. And also, I think that potentially we can use this to come up with a definition of our next deliverable, maybe end of stage 2, end of stage 3, which is that we've now agreed, we've now got consensus on what we have agreement on. So we have our shared base of decisions, and the tough part is going to be deciding on those things that are not easy, the things where we start excluding things. And I think there's an intermediate stage between those 2 points, which is perhaps when we have loaders that allow the full experimentation of what those difficult decisions might be, is that for some people, that's a usable end state. Having that base plus fully flexible loaders, that's in a position to try lots of things out, and that can then inform the follow-on phase of taking those difficult decisions. But please ask if I'm not clear with what I've just outlined there.
That was very clear to me. Yeah, and Jeff, you said browser-compatible specifier resolution. I think that we can hold off on that until we have loaders, because that's something that could be implemented with loaders. And maybe that's actually a good way that we can start thinking about it. If we assume that phase 3 is loaders, and phase 2 is all the things that we don't need loaders to make decisions on, and phase 4 are all the decisions we make after we have the loaders, we may be even in a place where we can make a pull request against core after phase 3 to update the experimental modules implementation to give the ecosystem a chance to experiment with various different loaders and to try to figure out what kind of defaults we want to include. Saleh, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just on browser interop, moving on to the next phases. I think it's always important to ask what a loader in a browser could look like. And I put it this way because I know that there were attempts, and there are still attempts to, find ways to maybe support bare specifiers and so on. I'm not going to name particular, attempts, but I guess we can also keep it in mind that while we try to design the infrastructure for loaders, we should consider if this was in a browser, what would it look like? Just consider if it would be a security concern or not. Maybe not have it tie us down in our design, but just if we can find a design that can lend itself to a browser standard, that would be really good for the community in general, for the JavaScript community in general.
Jeff, you got your hand up?
Hey, yeah. So I think I agree with your general proposal, Miles, of phase 2 is whatever little things we don't really need phases, I guess, at this point. Like we could just start merging in pull requests for anything that doesn't require loaders. Let's just do it, merge it in. Then I think loaders should be then the next priority, and then we merge that in to unblock these other later things. I think the browser compatible specifier resolution, I only brought that up just because we had been talking, like that was originally supposed to be part of phase 1 and we kind of bumped it out. That has some, I think we have some work to do there, like research, like the package name maps proposal, fleshing that out, doing something else instead of it. I don't know. But we should maybe think about like whoever's interested in that to try to flesh out like a design for that, so that by the time loaders are in, we could start shifting to that. And then for loaders, we should, I guess, be building it with that in mind, with the MIMES thing in mind, and any other, we should figure out what other dependencies are waiting on it so that, it can be designed with all those in mind. And then let's please not talk about merging this into core for at least quite a while.
That's fair. Jan, you have your hand up?
Well, maybe I should unmute, sorry. So I wanted to bring up one of speaking of loaders and speaking of package name maps, I'm not sure if people looked at Tink, so the new NPM package manager, which brings up the interesting aspect of node modules going away in favor of package name maps, because they actually do not in Tink, which is highly experimental and shouldn't be taken too seriously, but at least in Tink, they are experimenting with just getting rid of node modules as a resolution mechanism and moving to package name map, which might be interesting. Yeah, Tink. That's yeah. The naming is confusing, and I'm assuming that for plug and play, as that was just brought up by Wes, I'm assuming something similar could be true. So I think thinking about package name maps as a resolution mechanism rather sooner than later might make sense, potentially even before thinking about loaders, because it might affect the scope of what loaders would be or what would be required for.
I'll add in one quick thought, and then Jordan, I'll pass it off to you. But like, package name maps could be implemented via a loader, like support for those files. So I don't know that they're necessarily mutually exclusive. Jordan, to you.
Yeah, so both Tink or Cruise or whatever NPM calls their thing now, and Yarn plug and play are both really, they're experimental things. They're brand new. They both will break the ecosystem, definitely already break the ecosystem in lots of ways, and are trying to figure out how to avoid doing that. I don't even think that it's necessarily an automatic thing that getting rid of node modules is a good thing. I don't think it is a good thing to get rid of it, but I think that that theoretically anything should be possible with a loader, including implementing support for package name maps, or for Yarn plug and plays single manifest thing, or for whatever NPM comes up with. But I think that it is insanely premature to be designing around the fact that NPM and Yarn have like made an announcement and written up an RFC, because it remains to be seen that these are even tenable approaches. So like it's useful to be aware of them, and everyone involved in the working group, I should absolutely read up on both of them. But I think that we should not assume that the Node CJS module resolution algorithm and node modules is going away in the next, let's say, 5 years. I expect it will take much longer than that to actually affect such a change in the ecosystem. But I think that loaders should already are and should remain a way to implement whatever the community ends up wanting. That's my
Kevin, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so just my kind of philosophical approach is that this is a pretty exciting time to be involved. There's lots of ideas all in the air, and people are experimenting in all kinds of directions. And yeah, we should enable and encourage experimentation via loaders, and then we can see what works, and then using that information from all that experimentation, figure out a good plan. So. Yeah.
I'll take the lack of hands as an opportunity to speak my mind. So what's the saying in here? Seeing these maps as separate resolution is true but unhelpful. They're more like incremental caches. And I think I agree with that to an extent. I mean, like, if you look at how PNP is implementing things, they're going into require extensions, and they're kind of hijacking require itself. What I think that these patterns are showing, and I think that this is what Jeff was saying, was these are just showing patterns that people want to be experimenting with the way that things work. And I think that we definitely should be enabling that experimentation, especially when that experimentation is doing things like potentially improving cold boot time for node running in containers. I do think that there's kind of two different questions going on here to a certain extent. And one is like, what kind of infrastructure do we make available to people to customize the experience of Node versus what are Node's defaults? And I think in general, I'm hearing a collection of people wanting to move more towards the former than the latter. And I think that would be a wise move for us right now. So it's like, I think if we collectively all work on like creating a loader system that we could all build our ideal implementations with, we should be able to, from that, derive the hard decisions or potentially even not make decisions. I mean, there is a possibility that we find ourselves in a world where we don't have much more than the minimal kernel as the default, and we have a really rich loader ecosystem. Not saying that that's what we should do, but I'm excited about kind of the thoughts around loaders right now. So with that, we've got 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any final thoughts or last thoughts before we move on? It seems like one of us should take an action item to document the future phases. Would anyone like to volunteer for, just opening an issue, taking over some of the thoughts of what we had happen in today's discussion about kind of like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4? Can anyone take an action item on that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm happy to, if anyone else wants to contribute to, I'm happy to collaborate.
Excellent. Yeah. I'll definitely chime in. We're going to have the ability for an in-person meeting next week at Interactive. I will get the exact time that our session is scheduled so people can dial in, but we're not going to be running our regularly scheduled weekly meeting, and we will not be doing the following week. So our next meeting will be on August 24th. If anyone has any issues with that, let me know, but I just want to kind of stick to our original schedule and not just shift the weeks as they're running right now. Guy, you have 3 minutes. Do you want to try to quickly in 3 minutes tell us about, oh, did I say August? I meant October. Months are hard. Guy, do you have 2 seconds to tell us about high level where the dynamic module stuff went to at TC39?
I really don't want to try and explain it in 2 minutes.
Could you give us a high level of what you think the timeline is looking like?
Well, at the moment, the bottleneck is actually where we've moved to implementation. So the bottleneck is C++ development. If anyone is interested in helping out, if anyone's good with C++, please comment on the modules issue that I created on the Node.js modules issue tracker. It would be great to have help going through it. Gus is already helping me with some of it, but just trying to make it happen at the moment, however, with the little time I have as well. So yeah, any help would be very welcome.
Excellent. Thank you very much. With 2 minutes left, let's end this meeting early. I'm going to stop the stream now. Thank you for tuning in. Or actually, maybe we should check the stream really quickly, see if there's any questions. Thank you very much. No, the chat looks super empty. All right, cool. Let's turn the stream off and call it a day. Thank you, everyone, for